Every year at Ananda Village, we have a day called Rajarshi Day. And it's a day when the whole Ananda Village, it's around his birthday at the beginning of May, but the whole village of a couple hundred adults comes together, and we have a work day where we just carry out a lot of practical things at the whole community, putting up new fences, digging holes, gardening, building a wall or a fence or some practical thing. Because Rajarshi Janakananda was a great yogi. I think Master said he was Nakula or Sahadev, Vineet can tell me, in his past lifetime. And he really embraced and embodied what Yoganandaji really encouraged for all of us, was this combination of Western efficiency, practicality, combined with the deep spirituality of India. And he didn't teach that one or the other. He taught that it was important in this day, in this age, to do both. And Rajarshi had both very, very strongly. He was a successful yogi. He was a successful businessman. This is the way of our gurus and the way that they taught. Sri Yukteswarji also had this approach, and I'm just going to quote him in what Master wrote about him in Autobiography of a Yogi. He said about Sri Yukteswarji, "There was none of the vague or daft visionary about him. His feet were firm on the earth, his head in the haven of heaven. Practical people aroused his admiration." And Sri Yukteswarji would say, "Saintliness is not dumbness. Divine perceptions are not incapacitating," he would say. "The active expression of virtue gives rise to the keenest intelligence. Saintliness is not dumbness. Divine perceptions are not incapacitating." And Rajarshi, he would meditate even when he was living in Kansas in the middle of the United States, running his huge insurance business. As we know, he would meditate for a few hours every morning before he began his workday. But even when he became Yoganandaji's successor as the spiritual head of Self-Realization Fellowship, he continued with this combination of deep spirituality, of going into ecstasy, samadhi, but also having his feet on the ground. And this is a challenge, and this is a challenge that's been given to all of us. And what he taught, what Yoganandaji taught, what Sri Yukteswarji taught, is that saintliness is not dumbness, meaning that people sometimes will have a deep, what they think is a deep meditation, but it really just spaces them out, and just kind of, are not really able to function. But it's not super consciousness, that's usually subconsciousness. That said, we can't be overly rational, and it's a combination of these two. There's a account of a meeting that Rajarshi was at when he was the director of Yoganandaji's organization, and he was completely inward during this entire meeting, practicing the presence of God and Guru, possibly in samadhi. So he was completely silent throughout this whole meeting. And then, as the meeting was going on, they were dealing with a lot of practical details, including the accounting and the finances. And someone reported a number in the finances somewhere later in the meeting, after quite some time. And Rajarshi just suddenly said, "No, wait a minute. Earlier in the meeting, you said that number was such and such, and this time you said it was such and such. Where's the discrepancy there?" And so he was in the deepest state of samadhi, but his feet were also on the earth. Master really praised him for this. And there's a letter that Yoganandaji wrote to Rajarshi where you can tell he's including Rajarshi in his own understanding of this approach of doing both. And Yoganandaji writes, "Last night I was in samadhi. My pulse, my heart stopped. My body was dead, and my life force, like a comet, sprang through the spinal tunnel and head into the blue heavens. All matter became my dead body, and within it I saw the light of all life." And then he goes on to say, "I have been doing a million things, and I compared my divine state with work, and I found this truth. Very few of us know how to differentiate between the duties created by us and the duties assigned to us by God. Most think of their own desire-created duties as divine duties. Human desire-created duties bind and cause reincarnation. Even those who know what divine duties are do not know how to accomplish them divinely, and instead picture and plan according to their own wishes. Self-created duties and ideas of performing them, when frustrated, cause great misery and disappointment. But divine duties, performed divinely, whether frustrated or fulfilled, cause happiness in the doing, and in doing them again and again until God is pleased, whatever the results may be. And then he goes on to advise Rajarshi, but I think to affirm what he was already doing. So must you remain immersed in your business ventures and do everything, all your duties, with ever-increasing ambition to perform them extremely well, without ever caring if you meet resistance or temporary failure on your path. And so this is the way of the renunciate yogi, renouncing the ego, giving it to God, experiencing God in meditation, hopefully someday in ecstasy and samadhi, but at the same time effectively serving the divine in whatever practical, effective, efficient ways we can, but divinely, as Yoganandaji says, meaning with divine inspiration, divine intuition, divine guidance. And again, this is the combination that we're all trying to seek, and which is what Yoganandaji taught. And again, he talked about this combination of East and West, and he praised both. He loved America and its practicality, its willingness to do whatever it took to accomplish something. This idea that you would never say, no, I can't do it. You'll just say, I'll find a way to do it. And also, I think just a certain refinement in what was done to create beautiful places and gardens and buildings and to do things in a divine way, reflecting the divine ideals. But combined with what he saw in India, this deep spirituality, which he, of course, also admired even perhaps more deeply, because that's the foundation and the wellspring of inspiration that rises up the spine to the brain, that inspires these outward acts of goodness, of seva, of giving. But it is this combination in the end that is really, really important. And Babaji said he came to help mankind overcome this whole delusion of Western materialism, but the delusion part only being the indulging in it and the confusion of it. There's really is a higher aspect of both of these things brought together. And this is what Yoganandaji admired and was talking about. I love our monastery and these monks because people think of monks withdrawing from the world and sort of spacing out and not doing a whole lot of actual work and not being real practical. But we have to be extremely practical. We have to manage these businesses even, because we have to run this whole Kriya Yoga home study course effectively, efficiently, inspired. And people see the inspiration part. They see our monks chanting and giving these beautiful satsangs. But I wish at times people could sit in on some of the meetings that we have where these very same monks are doing bookkeeping and coming up with very creative but very practical solutions to technological issues that we're having, and working with Razorpay and Stripe and all these different gateways that work with the payment and dealing with all these very seemingly mundane things. But what we see is that when we do something for God and we use our minds clearly and effectively and creatively for God, it really benefits the devotee. But when we just sort of excuse ourselves and say, oh, I'm a devotee. I don't have to deal with practical stuff, and I can space out and stumble around really subconsciously. I can't tell you how often I hear of people talking about what they thought was a deep meditation, and you ask what was it, what did they experience, and they say, oh, it was just deep. I don't know. I just sort of went somewhere, and I don't know where I went. An hour later, I came out, and I don't know what happened, but it was deep. And you know, that's not really what a deep meditation is. That's more of a subconscious meditation. True inspiration, the energy rises up the spine, it inspires, uplifts, and it goes to the brain. And this is what Sri Yukteswarji was talking about. Saintliness is not dumbness. And I'll read that again, just the last part of it. Saintliness is not dumbness. Divine perceptions are not incapacitating. The active expression of virtue gives rise to the keenest intelligence. Divine perceptions are not incapacitating. To me, that statement has so much depth and meaning and truth to it, because partly what it's saying is that if we have a perception that we think is a perception and it is incapacitating, it's not a divine perception. It's a lower perception of subconsciousness or just a fantasy or an illusion. Divine perceptions are not incapacitating. They actually send the energy up the spine, as Master talked about in this letter that he wrote, where just this energy thrills and surges up the spine to the brain and does inspire. It doesn't make us necessarily, every one of us, suddenly a great business person and effective in that way. It inspires whatever it is that our dharma and our duty in life is. And so it will inspire one person to be a great artist or a great musician or a great business person or someone who writes really good computer code and creates great things. And this is what I've seen, the beauty of Ananda just over the years. I tell the story very often about a friend of mine at Ananda Village who created and invented almost single-handedly the app called Swipe, S-W-Y-P-E. He started working on it around 2009 or so, I think it was. I remember him coming to me to test it out on a phone. I never even had a mobile phone, but he handed me a phone and said, I want you to test this out and try swiping and doing these things. And he attributed the whole success of what he did to Kriya Yoga, meditation, and Divine Mother. He said that whenever he had problems with the code, computer code, the business, he would practice Kriya Yoga, pray to Divine Mother, and answers would come because divine perception would come. The energy would rise up the spine, and divine perception, not only is it not incapacitating, but it is capacitating, or whatever the opposite of it is, that helps us to be able to give to others and serve others more effectively. So Brahmachari Vinit will now share some on this beautiful topic of Rajarshi Janakananda.
Thank you, Devashiji. As Devashiji was sharing, it almost felt like he was just holding a mirror right in front of me. Where when I started on the spiritual path, it was like, I had all kinds of incapacitating perceptions, and how sometimes we can start off a little bit down. And I just wanted to read this letter. It just seems like a very nice continuation to where Devashiji stopped, about the two aspects of being practical and at the same time having this attitude of a yogi and complete non-attachment. So, and I wasn't sure which letter to read because there are so many beautiful letters. And I should admit, that I haven't read many of these letters before. And these classes were a good excuse for me to read them. And I would really encourage all of you to read these too. So having no other choice, I just picked up this letter, which was July 19th. I thought this is very close to July 17th. So let's go through this. It's a slightly long letter, but I'm going to read it, read a bit of a part of it. So Yoganandaji writes to Rajarshi Janakananda. He says, I am planning, working, yet I am free, completely free, even amidst my divine ambitions. Now, I'll read more, but I'll just stop with that word divine ambitions. Uh, and Devashiji also, when he read a short excerpt, he used the word ambitions. And when I came to the spiritual path, this is quite some time ago, not too long ago, but it's been a few years. And this word divine ambition, I hadn't heard it initially when I came to the path, but when I heard it a little later, I used to hear words like spiritual success, divine ambition, spiritual ambitions. And I don't know if it's the right use of this term called oxymoron. I thought these two are completely contradicting with each other. How can one thing be divine and you still have an ambition? How can you be spiritual and still be successful? I thought this is just so dumb. Remember what Devshiji said and what were Shri Yukteswarji's words? Saintliness is not dumbness. Well, I was dumb. And so basically, there was just, after a few months on the path, there was a lecture which Jayaji was doing. Naya Swami Jaya, some of you might know him. He's the spiritual director of Ananda India, and the city in which I lived, the center I was associated with, he was going to do a lecture over there, and the lecture was on the topic. I don't remember the exact words, but it had to do something with success. It was maybe like how to be a spiritual success, or how to be a success in life, or something like that. And again, I thought it's a dumb topic, but I had deep respect for Jayaji. And if he were to talk on how to, grow the most efficient way of growing peanuts, I would have still attended the topic. So, I still went out of my deep respect and reverence towards him. But at the back of my mind, I kept having this thought of, this is probably for novices, or it's probably for people who are not fully into it, who need other reasons to be on the spiritual path. Because for a true yogi, I was just with the concept of everything is, Maya, some more Maya hai, just armchair philosophy, which can happen in the beginning when we are on the path. So I was coming with that attitude. And again, saintliness is not dumbness, but I was dumb and my ways of looking at it were incapacitating. But soon I realized that the spiritual path takes a lot of energy. It is not for whims. You have to put out a lot of energy. It cannot be just passive, armchair philosophy like I was having such philosophical statements, but not really any good amount of realization. And soon I realized that any good work, whether spiritually or even in our own spiritual life, we need to have aspirations, ambitions. And I would like to read a quote from Paramhans Yoganand ji. He says, the reason most people don't progress as they want to is because they lack a sense of spiritual adventuresomeness. And isn't that true many times? I found myself stuck that, oh, my meditations are not going well, or I'm not, progressing spiritually. And it has usually boiled down to this one point. I have lacked a sense of spiritual adventuresomeness. That yes, I need to do this. This needs to be done. Divine Mother and my Guru Master want me to do it. And not with the attitude, oh, some more Maya hai, let's leave everything and go off. And sometimes there can be a mistaken sense of spirituality to think that leaving everything is spiritual. I was a student of chartered accountancy and I thought, oh, this is all too, more Maya, this is too worldly. So I'm not going to put my entire energy into it. And that usually translates because we are lazy, or I was lazy at least, and I didn't want to put that amount of energy. And slowly but surely, the gurus make us realize that spirituality is not letting everything go and leaving everything, but true spirituality is doing what needs to be done. That okay, I've taken up this task. God has given me this task of studying and finishing this course. Why be a wimp? Why be, a lazy boy, not wanting to do it? It's so convenient to say, oh, I'm spiritual, so I won't, prepare for these toughest exams which are in the country. It's just so convenient. Or, oh, I will not fulfill my responsibilities because I am spiritual. And Rajarshi Janakananda wasn't so, Swami Kriyananda wasn't so, Paramhans Yogananda wasn't so. And like he said in this one single line, he said, I'm planning, I'm working, yet I am free. And only when we do all that needs to be done, and yet we can say that, oh, I'm still free, That is when true spirituality, we could say, comes into the picture. And the second aspect, so I learned slowly that I have to be ambitious, I have to put out the energy, and we all have to do that. But then the other aspect, the balance aspect of it comes into the picture that, yes, and like Devashiji was reading it, that very few people, as Yogananda ji said, know their divine duties. And even if they know them, they don't really, I'm paraphrasing, they don't really fulfill them in a divine manner. And how often I've found myself attached to the outcome of a project I'm working on, get my emotions involved, be frustrated. This is what God wants me to do. And these people, it's usually to do with people and opinions. And these people are not allowing me to do God's will. So they are not good people. And no, there are going to be difficulties, there are going to be challenges. And but are we fulfilling them in a divine way? The means don't always justify the ends. We might be doing a divine work. We might be wanting to meditate. There was a very interesting time in my life where I was living with my family and I was trying to meditate. And just someday someone had knocked in my door. And I was just trying so hard to meditate. And I opened the door and I lashed out at them. And I was like, don't you have any sense of when to talk to a person and when to disturb them? And then I realized, huh, how inconvenient or how convenient it is to lash out at the other person, not realizing that all these things are actually coming from inside of me, that I lack the quiet, peaceful attitude which I'm trying to approach towards in my meditation. Would Yogananda ji or Rajarshi Janakananda or any of the great saints approve of this attitude? No, then probably I'm not being spiritual, I'm being something else. And so, similarly, we need to have that other balance too, that yes, we want to be spiritual, but our feet needs to be firmly on the ground. So, yes, when we are working on a project or even when we are meditating, we need to have that spiritual orientation which needs to happen. And now I'll go on to read the letter which Paramahansa Yogananda ji wrote to Rajarshi Janakananda. He goes on to write, nothing can hurt me. Let's hear it again. He's talking about planning and working, but yet he says, nothing can hurt me. Nothing can take away my joy, even if the whole world were taken away from me. Such joy, such joy that I feel the universe as my heart bursting with unending joy, ever new bliss. And then I'll skip a little and go forward. Do your mightiest, even as Buddha did. Little did you dream what you would be called upon to do. And the more you are doing, the more your power to do the divine work is increasing. Keep on, fear not. God will give you all the supply you need, provided you go through all the trials and tribulations of God's test for his name and work's sake. Our home and family is God and God's work. So we must work hard to maintain it. Even as a family man does everything to support his family, our life is dedicated on the altar of God. We must become his in every way. So we have to do everything we can and yet remain inwardly free. Nishkam Karma, we often speak about. And this is a very beautiful story which I had heard from Maya Swami Anandi when I came very early on the path. That when we speak about non-attachment and just doing the work which we need to do, I might be, changing the details of the story probably a little bit. It's been a long time since I heard it, but I hope I can still keep the essence that oftentimes, we think that God wants me to do this, which is true, but it's not that God wants any particular result from us. When Swami Kriyananda was told by Paramahansa Yogananda that your work will be of lecturing, editing, and writing, he didn't go into the specifics that you have to be a good lecturer, you have to give 1,000 lectures, you have to write 150 books, you have to edit so many books. It wasn't specifics. And even if Swami Kriyananda had failed miserably, he didn't. But even if he had, his guru told him to do it, and he would have done it. Similarly, Paramahansa Yogananda ji, he started a few projects in his life. He started a community. It failed. He started a school to disseminate his teachings in America. It didn't succeed, but God wanted him to do it, and he did it. And so the story which I was talking about, which I heard early on when I came on the path, was that there was a certain man who was on the spiritual path. And again, maybe I don't have the details right, but God appeared to him and he told this man that there's a big rock, right? Big, huge boulder of rock right outside your house. I want you to push it. And then God went away. And this man, obediently, a spiritual seeker, he pushed and pushed. Days went, weeks went, years went, nothing happened. He just kept pushing this rock, he kept pushing this rock, but this rock wouldn't move. And he got frustrated sometimes, but God asked him to do it. He did it. And then finally, with even mindedness, he kept pushing and pushing. And one final day, God appeared to him and he said, "My child, you have done my wishes. I'm very pleased with you." This man was like, "God, but you asked me to push the rock. I haven't been able to move it an inch. It is so huge." And God said, "My child, I asked you to push the rock. I didn't ask you to move it. I will move the rock for you." And then God, with his magical hand, just moved the rock in a nanosecond or in a second. And so, similarly, we have to listen what God wants us to do very, very carefully. God doesn't care of the results. He doesn't mind how successful we are, how greatly or in a grandiose way we do things. But if we keep our feet firmly rooted on the ground and at the same time remember to see what God wants us to do, then there is a lot of potential for each one of us to be great examples like Rajarshi Janakananda, like Swami Kriyananda, like Paramahansa Yogananda. So let's go with these few stories and let's keep our spiritual adventuresomeness at its height, but at the same time, let's be non attached and be a true yogi in our heart, doing whatever outward duties God asks us to do. With that, I would like to invite Devashiji if he has any finishing thoughts.
I'll just close by reading from one of these letters of Master to Rajarshi that's more inspirational. Master writes to Rajarshi, and he addresses him, "Stillness is the altar of spirit. There is no limit of the deepening of stillness. There is no limit of ever new joy. Never give mental boundaries to your perception of joy. One thing pleases me most, that you feel deepening of joy ever since you wrote to me, quote, 'My joy and bliss are growing deeper,' end quote. That is what my beloved Blessed One always writes me and what pleases me most." And he's referring to his Blessed One as Rajarshi himself. "So no boundaries to your perception in meditation, no depths to be reached. You must keep expanding in universal consciousness and keep deepening your perception of ever new, unending bliss. He is the inexhaustible bliss who will entertain us throughout eternity without cessation. With love, ever my own boundless blessings to you." Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Thank you for joining us.